There we go. All right, so we should be live now, and I'm going to share the slides for today.
I'm in class. Just let me see my chicken.
All right. Okay, so today we're going to talk about some photography tips, since you should be beginning to take pictures for your guide within the next couple of days. And we're going to talk about some related concepts, so ambiguity, fuzzy concepts, and hedging, which I had you do a reading about this week. So first of all, I wanted to remind you of the schedule for this week and the couple of things we've got coming up. So by the end of the day today, you've got a complete quiz 2. If you're having any problems with Respondus or anything like that, let me know, and I'm happy to talk you through it. A couple of readings for today that the quiz draws upon. And then by the end of the day on Sunday, I want you to send me a memo about some research that you've done on your fix. I'll show you the prompt for that for a second. You can find this prompt on Blackboard too. And our big question today for this discussion is, how can you hedge responsibly? And I'll have a couple of questions related to that big question for you. So this is the prompt for the research memo, the thing that's due on Sunday. This is again up on Blackboard. So in your proposal, there was one paragraph, short paragraph about repair information that's already on the internet about your fix. And the main purpose of this memo will be to expand on that paragraph. So there you talk briefly about the things you found in this memo. You'll respond to at least 3 sources of information and answer some questions about them. So talk a little bit about the author, summarize it, explain what will be useful to you, and then describe in detail how your guide will be different, how your pictures will be better, and so on and so forth. Again, as with your previous memo, you should include a standard header for that memo, including your team tag, a topic, and you should proofread it carefully. You can answer these point by point. You know, you can have the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 for each of your 3 sources. If you're struggling to find 3 sources, again, let me know. I'm happy to help you do some research. Those sources don't necessarily need to be directly related to your repair. It can be something that's a similar kind of repair that nevertheless is useful to you because it helps demonstrate some specific aspect of your repair. It doesn't have to be exactly the same thing. Are there any questions about that, either from any of the folks who are here right now?
So you said that the memo needs to have a similar header that our proposal has? Yeah,
correct.
Okay, yes, ma'am. And that memo just needs to be 1 paragraph?
One paragraph for each of the 3 sources.
Oh,
so
okay.
I want you to answer these points 1 through 6 for each of those 3 sources. And you can do those in a list. It doesn't necessarily have to be in paragraph form. But for each source, answer these 6 questions.
Okay, I'm having trouble seeing the 6 questions on my phone.
Hang on, the slide is not showing properly. Let's try this again. Does that come up now? Is that better?
No, ma'am, it's not.
Oh, that's odd.
I'm sorry. I apologize. It's my fault for not being on a laptop or something right now. But
no, that's all right. If the presentation isn't showing properly, that's not good. Is anyone else able to see the slides when I'm presenting them?
I'm on a computer and I can see it fine.
You can see it on the computer. Okay.
I can see them.
Okay. It might be a problem with the mobile thing then. The prompt is available on Blackboard too, so you can check it there if you're not able to see it now. Or of course you can come back to the video later. But if you have questions about it as you're going through it, if you can't find this prompt, let me know and I'll do what I can to help you out.
Yes, ma'am. So we do need at least 3 sources?
Correct. Yeah, at least 3 sources. They don't necessarily have to be exactly the repair you're conducting, but they should be related to some extent.
Okay, yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So by the end of next week, so not this Sunday, but by next Sunday, you must have taken the photos for your guide, and that's checkpoint 1 if you're following along on the iFixit EDU website. And I wanted to give you a couple of tips for taking those photos, assuming that some of you will begin this weekend, some of you may start early next week. First of all, the Tech Writing Handbook strongly recommends using a tripod. They say even a cheap one. And I know many of you are using your cell phone camera. I wanted to share with you a couple of ideas for how to create a sort of DIY tripod using binder clips to support your phone. So the first one here has binder clips attached to a piece of cardboard at the width of the phone. The second one has rubber bands around the binder clips to hold the phone up. So even if you don't have a tripod that your phone can mount onto, you can nevertheless use things to prop it up, because if the phone is stable and not in your hands, it's much less likely to shake, much more likely to be able to focus on small things in front of it. For the same reason, I encourage you to use the timer to minimize the camera shake. And on the iPhone, which is this one on the right, it's the little thing that looks like a clock. Different Android photo apps do it differently, but most of them have something in settings that let you turn on the self-timer. And that'll mean that when you hit the camera button, it'll take a couple seconds before it actually takes the photo. And that means that the camera can stop shaking from your hands after having hit the button, which is helpful. I also wanted to encourage you to use as powerful of lighting as you can. Depending on what you're doing, this may be more or less possible. But if you have clamp lamps, use them. If you have daylight bulbs instead of soft white or yellow light, certainly use those. And the more light you can get from different angles, the better. If you can get diffuse light, that's even better. But basically, you want the light to be as strong as possible, the camera to be as unshaky as possible. Are there any questions about photos? Any of you begun taking photos, have concerns you've run into? All right, we'll move on. Okay, a couple of other things I wanted to highlight from the readings. One is this point from the Kirkman and Turk, saying that a lot of problems with manuals are caused by confusion between the task of describing the process and describing how to operate the equipment. And I do want to emphasize that your guide will only be for the repair specifically that you're focusing on. And you don't have to talk about how to operate the equipment properly. So whatever it is that you're fixing, you can either assume that your reader already knows how to use that thing, or that they can figure out how to use that thing. Your goal is describing the process, not how to use the object. A couple other things. This point about relative words from Kirkman and Turk, I really wanted to emphasize that words like back and front of the object are always relative to the position of the reader, and therefore, if you can find something that doesn't refer to the position of the reader, it's better. So something like cover would be better than front, something like body would be better than back, so on and so forth. And if you're not sure what to call something, you can always Google parts of your object. So for example, if you were looking at a pen and you weren't sure what to call the front of the pen, you might Google pen parts, pen schematic or something like that to figure out that the little clicky bit is called the thrust device and the thrust tube, the ballpoint tip and the spring, so on and so forth. So if you're not sure what it's called, try to figure it out by doing a little bit of research so that you're consistent about the terms you use, and so that the terms you use will likely be familiar to your reader, or at least searchable for them. Other thing I wanted to point out from the Tech Writing Handbook, this point about humor, which we'll get into some more next week when you're reading the Postmodern Space of Operators manuals. But I think it all sort of boils down to this. Everyone likes humor. Apply with extreme care, however. I think when you look at iFixit guides written by people who work there, there are moments where they're definitely humorous. And I think that there's some value in that. It keeps people interested. A big part of the concerns that we talked about last week, the kinds of things that are bad with manuals often boil down to they're they're boring, they're hard to read, they're inaccessible, they're not made to be interesting. And a little bit of humor can go a long way in that regard. However, it doesn't translate well, number one. Number two, what you find funny isn't necessarily going to be what everyone finds funny. So it's a tricky balance, but I do want you to feel free to use a little bit of humor if it feels relevant, if something strikes your funny bone. Okay, so I wanted to talk some about this idea of fuzzy concepts, which comes from this cognitive linguist named George Lakoff. And he's most famous for his work on metaphors. He talks about central metaphors used to explain complex phenomena. Says that we all sort of come back to these common metaphors. His most famous work. Oh, I'm sorry. Somebody is feeding back. I'm not sure who. It wasn't before, but now it is. I don't know. Anyway, so. His most famous work is in cognitive semantics, which is this idea of categories as structuring the way we think about things. And this title, "Women, Fire, and Dangerous Things," comes from this language in which all feminine nouns are including things like fire and dangerous things. So the specific piece I wanted to talk about, though, is an article of his about hedges and this idea of fuzzy concepts. And to exemplify this, to demonstrate this, I wanted to ask you, how tall is Arnold Schwarzenegger? Do any of you have any idea, how tall Arnold Schwarzenegger is?
Tomato.
How'd you say? What did you say? Sorry.
Tomato.
Tomato?
No.
Okay. Well, anyway, I think you would be wrong probably to say that he's pretty tall. Pretty is a hedge, or at least somewhat tall, right? And if you see him in this picture from Kindergarten Cop, where he is much taller than all the kindergartners, he certainly seems pretty tall in this picture. But if you see him in this picture next to Wilt Chamberlain and Andre the Giant, he certainly seems much less tall. And after seeing this picture, you might say he's only somewhat tall. But I think this is a nice example of this idea of fuzzy concepts, because it's a question that people have been debating for a long time. How tall is he exactly? He hasn't reported exactly, and there's a whole website dedicated to this question of how tall is Arnold Schwarzenegger. And the answer is that he's somewhere between 5'9" and 6'2". And this is a perfect example of this idea of a fuzzy concept, this question of tallness. Lakoff talks about how the degree of tallness ranges from around 5'3" to around 6'3", where 6'3" is definitely tall, 5'3" is definitely not that tall. But Arnold Schwarzenegger's range of possible heights is interesting because it falls in rather different places on this category. It's not that tall if he's around 5'9". It's pretty tall if he's around 6'3". But the point that Lakoff makes in this article about hedging is that everything is a little bit fuzzy, even things that we wouldn't normally think of as being ranges. We do think of tallness as being a range, but something like birdiness, like is something a bird? You wouldn't normally think of as having a range of possibility. But so if I ask you this question, is this a bird? I would suspect that most of you would say absolutely yes, it's definitely a bird. And if I ask you this question, how much is a bird? That would seem ridiculous, right? It's a bird. It doesn't matter how much of it is a bird. But if I ask you, is this a bird? Then the question begins to make a little bit more sense. That ostriches don't have the normal qualities of birds. They don't fly. They're not small. They don't eat seeds and nuts, that sort of thing. And if I asked you how much is it a bird, you might say, well, maybe a little less than a sparrow, but more than some other birds, maybe. If I ask you, is this a bird? The answer is no, but how much is it a bird? It's in some ways, it's maybe more like a bird, like the traditional qualities of a bird than the ostrich, in that a bat does fly, and bats do eat fruits. Some bats do, at least. And to continue to demonstrate this concept, I think you can compare different birds, comparing pelicans and sparrows, for example. I think the sparrow is birdier. Duck or blackbird, what do you guys think? Who's birdier?
Blackbird.
Blackbird, because he eats worms, doesn't swim, I think. Right. Parrot or egret? I don't know. Anyway, you get the point. That even this idea of bird, which normally seems so black and white, it is a bird, it isn't a bird, has a range of qualities that contribute to birding it. And Lakoff talks about categories like toys, for example, which have central members of ball and doll. You say a doll is definitely a toy, a ball is definitely a toy. And then more peripheral members, things like swings and skates and so on. Same thing with sickness. Cancer and measles are classic sicknesses. They're the central members of the category of sickness. They're broader things more peripheral, like rheumatism and rickets, which they're sicknesses, but they're not sort of the sicknesses. And you can see this also in the kinds of words that we consider to be synonyms. So if you look up protest in a thesaurus, you might see also things like march and demonstration, maybe even riot. What's the difference between a protest and a march? Is there a difference between a protest and a march?
You can march without protesting.
You can march without protesting. Yeah, how so?
I mean, you march in the military without protesting something, probably. When you train or something like that. I'm not really sure. But...
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so there are marches that aren't directly connected to a cause. And in that way, maybe protest and demonstration are closer. What about riot? How is riot different?
More like a violent.
Yeah. There's hints of violence there. The idea that maybe it gets out of control a little bit. Same thing. This is maybe a little more relevant to science writing. Sometimes a scientific paper will describe the people conducting the study as doctors, sometimes as experimenters, sometimes as researchers. And I think when they're talked about as researchers, that's maybe more neutral. Experimenter suggests sort of a coolness or an unemotionality about it. Doctor, it implies a level of prestige for the people who are conducting the study. So again, hedging, which we'll talk about a little bit more in a minute, I think hedging reveals this fuzziness. It demonstrates how even categories that we tend to think of as black and white, is a bird or isn't a bird, is a doctor or isn't a doctor. Nevertheless, most of these categories have some kind of a range of meaning that when we hedge, we reveal. So I wanted to show you a couple of hedges from these are all from WikiHow, which is a similar site to iFixit in that it's a bunch of how-to content that's wiki editable. It's not specifically related to repair. And I want you to rank these in order of hedginess. So again, hedging is making something less absolute than it could possibly be. So things that make something fuzzier, basically. So these 4 sentences: A is the toddler generally understands more language than he or she can verbalize. The toddlers vary a lot in verbal comprehension. B is allow the fudge to set for about 1 to 2 hours until hard. C is A. arguta is probably one of the most likely of Angelica species to be confused with water hemlock. And D is making decisions when anxious, stressed, or upset will likely lead to poorer outcomes. All right, so I'm going to give you about 30 seconds to think about this. I want you to rank them in order of hedginess. So figure out what order you would put them in, A, B, C, and D. And I'll ask you to report back to me in just a minute.
Check to see it.
Oh, Shohei asks, what is the meaning of hedginess? Hedginess is like how uncertain something is, how not absolute something is.
Lean.
Okay, all right. Which one do you think is the most hedgy? How many of you put A at the top as the most hedgy? Anybody? No? Okay, how about B as the most hedgy?
E.
B, so allow the fudge to set for about 1 to 2 hours until hard. How about C?
I thought it was C.
I see a couple of hands. How about D? Anybody put D? Okay, so what makes C the most hedgy, those of you who said that?
Because it says it can be easily confused with water hemlock instead of it being absolute that it's the angelic species of, or however you say that, arguta.
Yeah, yeah. So I think this one has 2 hedges. It's got the probably, and it also has most likely. And you're right that even this idea of being confused with water hemlock is a little bit hedgy. Something more absolute would be something like A. arguta is not water hemlock. No, something like that. Okay, all right. What is the next most hedgy?
I said B.
B.
Mm.
That's what
Why?
I said.
Why B?
I said B because different people have different look. Someone may think that the fudge is hard at a different point than someone else would, and so it's kind of fuzzy on what is technically what's the set best for it.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, this idea of hard is hedgier maybe even than you'd think based on the language, and the trying to figure out whether or not the fudge is hard will depend on your definition of hard. It also has this ranking here about 1 to 2 hours. Absolutely. Yeah, I think A is also fairly hedgy. It's got this generally is a hedgy word. Vary a lot is a hedgy phrase. And the whole thing is sort of talking about varying. The toddler generally understands more language than he or she can verbalize, but toddlers vary a lot. It's got sort of the double hedge there. This last one, D, has will likely lead, and that's a hedge also. So the reason that I want you to be aware of hedging is that, number one, I think the iFixit Tech Writing Handbook warns you not to hedge. And I don't think that that's always the best case. I think sometimes you need to hedge in order to be accurate about whatever it is you're considering. And the other is that hedging is really, really common in science writing, which we'll talk about more in the coming weeks. But my first question for you is, when should you hedge in a manual? Assuming that there are some points when you should make things less certain, make things less absolute, when should you hedge? I'm going to pull back out so I can see your faces here. All right, so let's start at the end here. So Aaron, what do you think? When should you hedge in a manual?
I don't really know. The whole hedging and stuff is confusing me a little bit. Uh, yeah, I'm not sure.
Okay, all right, we'll come back to you. Allison, how about you? What do you think? When should you hedge?
Maybe if it's like a manual for like an artistic kind of thing, so that kind of guides them in how to do it, but not specifically like what it should be look like, you know, like for the artistic side of it.
Okay, so you're saying if the process itself allows for some interpretation, then it makes sense to use language that allows for interpretation. I can see that. Yeah, absolutely. But I think even in manuals that are about more absolute things, there are moments when you should be hedging. Kenny, how about you? What do you think? What are other places where you should hedge in a manual?
Well, first and foremost, I think it depends on like the context of what the manual is about. Like if you are, writing up a manual for cooking something, towards the end of the instructions, it should say, well, this is how your food should look, or it should take this long to cook, or it's likely to look this way, or something like that. Or the instructions may not be as clear or precise because it's open to, what you've done, because it's not going the same thing every time. It's not something that is so precise and so 100%. This is going to be the product of these ingredients. So something that's more open to what we are doing, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. So you're saying that there's some procedures that may have variable outcomes, and hedging can make your instructions amenable to those variable outcomes. You can see that.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah. I think that's the direction I'm going with it.
Rebecca, how about you? What do you have to add when you should hedge?
Usually I think that you should hedge in technological manuals to where if the product's not working, like whenever they're telling you what to do, they always say it should do this.
Yeah.
Instead of it will.
Okay, so to allow for the possibility that the user has done something wrong or made a mistake somewhere, so that the hedging can demonstrate what the intended outcome is without assuming that is what has happened. And presumably that would be also a moment where you could say, if it doesn't look like this, here's what to do. All right, Shohei, I see you put a comment there in the side. You say when a document says that you should make the door move smooth, in this case, how smooth should depend on who's using it. In this case, I think that is the case when it should hedge. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so certainly there are things like smooth or even like hard in the case of that fudge that are qualities that are dependent on the user. You may or may not. Yeah. People may have different definitions of smoothness, for example. Okay, great.
That's right.
So my next question for you is what are the risks of hedging in a manual? I'll pull that up for a second, give you a second to think about it. Go. So this question was in the quiz, at least for one of the answers. But I think there are many risks of hedging. Acknowledging that there are certainly points when you should be hedging, and yet nevertheless there are points when you should not be. So why wouldn't you hedge? Why shouldn't you hedge? We'll go backwards this time. So actually, Shohei, let's start with you. Give you a second to type.
Yeah, let me give me the time to type.
Okay, all right. We'll start with Rebecca, and we'll come back to you, Shohei.
The risks of hedging in manuals often comes whenever the desired effect is not known itself. So you could say it should do this, and then other people will kind of look at it and be like, well, what if it does something else? Is that bad?
Yeah. So if you say should, and then it should look like this, and then you don't have a statement indicating what should happen if it does not look like that, then you open up a possibility for confusion, anxiety. It might make your readers very anxious. Okay, Kenny, what do you think? Other risks of hedging in a manual?
I mean, really, I agree with what Rebecca said, as far as my opinion. But there are certainly risks. I mean, I don't know if you're looking for like a direct risk of, someone hedging something in a manual or protocol. I mean, there could be risks of a protocol that says that, you should maybe use these ingredients for a chemical mixture that you end up blowing up a lab or something, and
Yeah.
but I tend to agree with what Rebecca was saying more than kind of formulating something on my own or independently, I guess, on this question.
Sure. I mean, I think what you point to about procedures in a lab or something is important. That there are procedures that are so specific that if you hedge it, it may incite more confusion than it helps clear up. If you hedge in a moment where you should be precise, that can cause problems.
Yeah, yes, man. That's kind of what I'm saying.
Allison, oh, I see. Here we go. Okay. Shohei says, for example, in cooking, if the manual says add decent salt, then some people put too much salt and ruin the food. That's right. Yeah. So, even something that is more variable, like cooking procedures or artistic procedures or something, you want to hedge in the right moments. Allison, how about you? Anything to add about risks of hedging?
I think everyone pretty much already said it, but it could turn out for the wrong results that wasn't desired necessarily, and then that would cause the confusion with the consumer.
Yeah, absolutely. Aaron, how about you?
Like if for rounding numbers and different stuff like that, like cutting something out and it has to be exact, if that's off a little bit, that can cause the whole thing to go wrong.
Yeah.
And there's a risk in that if they didn't say exactly what it was, if it's not clear and kind of goes around everything, doesn't really tell you an exact thing. That can cause problems for measuring stuff and doing stuff like that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think that's actually a great moment to end this bit of the discussion on. Let's see here. I'm going to bring the slides back up. Because I had you look at this tool called the Hedgematic, which was designed by some language researchers at Michigan State. And it's an automatic hedge detection machine, basically. So you put in a piece of text and it tells you how hedgy it is. It gives you a percentage hedginess. It goes sentence by sentence and finds hedgy words. And so a lot of the things we've been talking about, so words like possibly and probably and a little and sort of and seems and might and suggests and so on and so forth. All of these things the Hedgematic hunts for and finds. But what Aaron was talking about, this idea of rounding numbers and that sort of thing, the Hedgematic is not so good at getting, and I think they're also hedges. Numerical hedging is a big part of science writing, figuring out at what level to distill things down, because you're not gonna spill it out to the very last decimal point probably, but the where you cut off will change the potential precision of whatever it is you're talking about. So these are things I'll want you to be looking for when you analyze an article at the end of the course. So your last assignment will be to look at a journal article in your field and look for things including hedging. And so I'll want you to come back to this when you do that, and maybe try putting it into the Hedgematic. So these are some of the results that the Hedgematic gives. So it'll find sentences that draw qualified conclusions or predictions or make qualified recommendations. So it'll look for things like the present results suggest. We'll look for words like could, words like particularly. Things like, although the details of this argument are not supplied, it appears that, so on, in Appleby's view. If this course were longer, I would have you read an article about the risks of hedging in science writing that examines the case of Andrew Wakefield, who is the scientist behind the autism vaccine controversy. So Wakefield and his research group published a very famous study in the mid-90s that purported to suggest a link between vaccines and autism. And the study ended up getting widely discredited, and Andrew Wakefield lost his medical license. But this idea of a link between vaccines and autism has been, it got picked up widely in the media, and it's become a very, very powerful misconception that people have had a lot of trouble disproving. And so this article looks at the sort of how the hedging in Wakefield's original study made it possible for people who were not scientists to read the article in a particular way. So this is Andrew Wakefield, the doctor who found this purported connection between autism and vaccines. And so the article found that scientists read hedging in one way. So the Wakefield study hedged a lot. And when scientists read that, they said, well, okay, these are qualified results. These are, results that say they've found a potential correlation. But when news media picked up that study, they dropped a lot of that hedging. So they didn't see the hedging in the same way. And so what might be acceptable hedging in the science realm sort of gets stripped away when it gets picked up in news media. So this is a sentence from the Wakefield study with a huge amount of hedging. And we've identified a chronic enterocolitis in children that may be related to neuropsychiatric dysfunction. In most cases, onset of symptoms was after the MMR immunization. Further investigations are needed to examine the syndrome and its possible relation to this vaccine. So you see there are 4 different moments of hedging there. So it may be related. In most cases, further investigations are needed. Possible relation to the vaccine. So I don't know, if we were to rank this hedging on a scale of 1 to 10, I'd probably put it about an 8 or a 9 maybe. It could be hedgier, but it's pretty dang hedgy. And in science writing, in order to make a claim that is really surprising to people, to make a claim that seems to go against previous medical discourse, you have to hedge like this. You have to make it clear that this is a qualified finding, something that requires further investigation. But of course, when it gets picked up in news media, that hedging sometimes disappears. Oops, okay, so here we go. Slides are sometimes kind of slow at switching. My last question for you, which we'll return to when we look at your articles more specifically in a couple of weeks. If hedging is necessary for honest science, if it's you have to make the point that further investigations are needed, so on and so forth. How can science writers hedge responsibly? Or maybe, what does it mean to hedge responsibly?
Maybe, like, for example, in that one that you just read, that it said in most cases, so that so that people know that it doesn't happen to everyone, but it's a possibility. And so they're showing that there's a possibility of it, but they're not saying it's absolute that it's going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see that. Maybe, is there irresponsible hedging? Is there hedging that would keep science writing from being honest science?
Yes, there is.
What would that look like?
Well, the way that you asked the question kind of made me give a fast repeat, but I think that hedging can surely uh, make a difference in a scientific paper when the evidence or the data suggests maybe something different than what the scientific bias may be, because whether we all agree on it or not, there probably is bias within the scientific community when you even just talk about things like climate change, which is so accepted among scientists. So there may be writing within an article that suggests that like the data may tend to agree with some climate change ideas or phenomena, but the actual hedging itself may not be an accurate representation of the real raw data.
Okay, so you're saying that that over hedging may misrepresent the case, that it may be more certain than hedging makes it seem. Am I understanding you correctly?
I think that using hedging as a tool can kind of skew data to where it's more fit into a bias instead of instead of it being actual science, I guess. The real raw data. I think that I've probably seen it before reading scientific papers where hedging is used to fit a certain thing that is so accepted among scientists. Even when you talk about things like evolution or things like that, hedging is used where you take a case where you say, oh, well, it may be more likely to fit, with peripatric speciation, when really the data suggests that it may not, but they use hedging as a tool to fit to a theory or to fit to something that is widely accepted. You see what I'm saying?
I see. Okay, so you're saying that hedging is a moment to go beyond the data, move from what is absolutely evident from data to what data might suggest, which opens up space for potentially unfounded explanations.
Maybe, yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah, and like that hedging is used to, fit some kind of scientific idea. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, that you're saying that scientists may have preconceived notions or arguments that they're trying to make that that may not be wholly supported by their data, but they use hedging to make connections between their data and those notions or those arguments.
Exactly. That's what I was trying to say. I'm sorry for the whole long drawn out.
No, it's okay. It's a big question, and I certainly don't expect us to be able to answer it absolutely. And I appreciate you for pushing at the edges of it. So yeah, this idea is something I want you to continue to think about over the next couple of weeks. We'll come back to it when you begin to analyze your own articles at the end of week 4. So just a review of the rest of what's happening this week. So again, by tonight, I want you to complete that second quiz. Let me know if you have any problems. And again, those quizzes, you do have 2 attempts for. So if you don't do as well as you like on the first attempt, you can take it again. And you should be able to see some feedback after you take the quiz. I'm not sure. I'm a little bit new to Blackboard quizzes. I really prefer using Google Forms. So if you can't see that, let me know and I'll see if I can fix it. By Sunday, I want that research memo, which is 3 sources, 6 questions about each of those sources. And I do want you to play around with the hedge-o-matic a little bit. Try putting some text into it and see, how much do you hedge in your emails? How much do you hedge in your class writing? That sort of thing. Maybe try putting your proposal memo into it and see what you find. For next week, checkpoint 1 will be due by the end of next week, and that's taking photos for your repair guide. You'll upload them to a guide. You won't have text for the guide yet. And then we'll be talking some about what I call the myth of clarity. And that's this idea that we work toward clarity always in technical writing, but we can never absolutely achieve it. There is never absolute clarity. And the three readings on that for next week sort of address that from different perspectives. Kirkman argues maybe more toward absolute clarity. Okay, all right, so that's it for this week. Are there any other questions before I let you go?
What if we do have text?
If you do have problems with what? Sorry.
Like, if you're already like casually halfway done with writing the first draft, stop writing it? Okay.
No, oh no, did you say stop writing it? No. If you're ahead of the game, more power to you. If you're ready to, to put up the majority of your guide, that's fabulous. And even, at any point, if you have a draft of a guide you want me to look at, I'm happy to give you some feedback. And I know iFixit will too. So even if it's before checkpoint 1 is absolutely due, you're welcome to send me or send iFixit or send both of us a link to the draft of your guide and show us what you've got so far. And, we'll, the earlier the better, really. The more time you have to respond to feedback and integrate it. And people that do send things in early, send in links for feedback, tend to do better because they're able to integrate feedback more quickly and before sort of the rest of the course catches up. Any other questions? All right, thank you folks for participating. It was great to chat with you all. Have a good week. I will see you next week maybe, and if not, I'll look forward to chatting with you. And email me if you have any questions. I'll be on Google Hangouts for the next couple of hours too. Great, have a good week, folks. Bye-bye.
Bye.